Hello everyone, I'm Zoe and welcome to my tutorial on narrative in games. So the structure of this tutorial is going to be as follows. I will first define what is narrative in the definition that I prefer to be using for this tutorial. And then I will go into writing for games, but not just writing, but other ways that you can tell a story within a game, including some examples of games that might do that successfully that you can play, or if you have played them, you might know what they have done successfully in the terms of what I'm going to be talking about. If not, go ahead and play those. And then I'm going to give you guys a very short tutorial on working with Yarn Spinner. If you guys did not attend the advanced tutorial taught by Johnny on Yarn Spinner, this will cover a little bit different things, but if you want to get a more complete or different experience working with Yarn Spinner, especially on the coding end of that, I will recommend that you watch Johnny's advanced tutorial on Yarn Spinner. Okay, so what is narrative? I chose this definition rather than the dictionary definition because of the wording. So it says a narrative is a way of presenting connected events in order to tell a good story. And that quote comes from a masterclass article on narrative writing. And I liked this rather than the dictionary definition because the dictionary definition is more specific to writing, as in how you would traditionally think of writing, as in words, dialogue, novels, that sort of thing. But I wanted to kind of skew it in more of a direction of storytelling is not just writing. There's a lot more that goes into it, especially in a format like games. So that brings us to what is writing for games and what does it look like? And I have the asterisks here because narrative storytelling is not just writing words, especially in games. And my tip for you I have for you before we move on is to play a variety of different games to see how they all incorporate some form of narrative, such as visuals, and some tools you might want to use for that would be mood boards, storyboarding. This would include the graphics of the game, the overall aesthetic look of it, and how that contributes to the story that you're telling. You can also tell a story through sound. Music is a really big one for that. There's a lot of games that have really, really well thought out scores that really help to drive the narrative forward, and sound effects as well. And then also objectives. Sometimes the game mechanics themselves can move the story along in ways that some of the other elements don't necessarily. And then, of course, you can combine them. Most games use all of these methods or have one or two that drive the story forward more than others. But, it's always useful to keep in mind that video games are a very interdisciplinary medium. And so you really have to be thinking about all these moving parts, even if you're just working on one. So an example of great visual storytelling that I really love is Gris. If you haven't played this game, I highly recommend it, especially if you love platformers and puzzle games. There is absolutely no dialogue in this, but it tells a very coherent and emotionally impactful story as the character progresses through the game. I've included a couple of screenshots here of really showing you like strong color palette and how that relates to the mood. And this is also a really good example of audio storytelling because music is very important to this game. And then also storytelling using game mechanics. And what I mean by that is that in this game, the story progresses forward as the levels progress forward in conjunction with them. And so basically, each level, the level design of this game and the puzzles that come with it directly correlate and are designed around the stories that are being told. For example, there is a level where the character goes through a desert, a red desert, and you can't move forward. It kind of, the wind pushes you back as you're trying to progress through the level. And so you have to think about what to do and where to stop and how to progress through the level, but it is that mechanic that is telling you that story of how she is struggling forward in her emotional narrative. This is a fun example that Athena recommended to me. I have not played it, but I watched this like 15-minute demo playthrough that I linked. And this is like a very literal definition of storytelling. It's literally called Storyteller. And it also uses the game mechanics to encourage the player to tell their own story. Again, there's no dialogue. It's all these little storyboards that you create by dragging in different elements to meet this prompt of what the story is, but you get to determine what the story is. And it's also a good example of visual storytelling because, like I said, it's a little storyboard. And so that kind of gives you some good ideas on a very like literally translated level of what I'm talking about when I say these things. And another game, I didn't include it in here this time, but it's something that I really love. Is if you haven't played Florence, it takes less than an hour to play through. It is also a really good game, like Gris, where the puzzles tell the story. And somebody reminded me that I should have included that one in this tutorial, so I'm sorry I didn't include that. It is a really great game, and I encourage you to play that game as well. But I want to write words, you might be crying right now. Well, don't worry, this is still a writing tutorial, even though I'm covering some other non-traditionally writing ways of telling stories. The biggest difference between regular creative writing, such as novels or even screenplays, and game-specific creative writing, is that it's interactive. Your story may or may not be linear, but the player needs to fit in it somewhere. And so the tip that I have for you is write a choose your own adventure to get into the mindset of interactive writing, because that operates on the same principles as a game does. No matter what the genre of the game you are making, your player is a part of that story somehow. Even if you are telling a visual novel that is exactly linear, you still have to think about what the player's input might be. And also writing a choose your own adventure is really great to get into this mindset if you're a little bit scared to jump right into it and work with other developers and you just want to write something that's just text, just to get you into just the rhythm of thinking about games that are thinking about writing that has an element of interactability to it. And so I'll also go through these elements of game writing, including story arc, dialogue, cutscenes and cinematics, flavor text, and barks. And I'll tell you what those all are in a second. So we're going to start with story arc because this is the big picture. And this is all about what journey are you taking your player on? Like you would think about it in writing a novel, for example, what journey you're taking your protagonist on. Your player is essentially your protagonist in most cases for games, and you have to think about what they're doing this throughout the game and how do they end, how do they begin, how does the narrative progress through the game, and how do player choices affect the outcome. Example, if you guys know me, you'll know that I'm a big Dragon Age fan. So my example for this one is Dragon Age Origins. You play as a Grey Warden recruit tasked with stopping the Blight by gathering armies across Thedas. But you have a lot of choices throughout the game, and as a player, you can affect the result of the ending using the armies that you recruit. You don't necessarily have to follow exactly what it tells you at the beginning of the game. The relationships you make with the other characters, and the game's ending. There are a few different endings that you can kind of mix and match in that game, and it all really depends on the type of character you're playing and the story that you want to tell. So you have some control over that, and relinquishing a little bit of that control as a writer to the player is part of what makes this experience kind of fun, giving them that element of choice. And then we have dialogue, pretty self-explanatory. And depending on the game you're making, this may be a major tool in how the story gets told. And I say maybe because, we have looked at a couple examples of games that don't have dialogue. They still include writing on the sense of a story arc, but it's not told through words, it's told through visuals, it's told through music, it's told through gameplay. And so dialogue is probably going to be, in most cases of games, if you're considering making a heavy story, heavy narrative game, an RPG, a visual novel, dialogue is going to be a major tool for that, and it's going to be most of your writing that the characters interact with. And so you have to think about what characters, NPCs, does the player interact with over the course of the game? What information do they reveal or not reveal? And that's a big point too, is sometimes what the NPCs do not reveal to your character tells a little bit more about what they reveal sometimes, especially if you are making, say, an RPG and there's quests, you open up this possibility of mystery. This can all be done really well with dialogue. And do you have a variety of options for your player to choose from in terms of dialogue? So do you have a dialogue tree of options that all lead to different outcomes? Do you have fake outcomes, aka like you have the illusion of choice, right? So you give the player multiple options to choose from, but they all lead to the same outcome anyway. It's just so that they can be engaged and have fun with how they're playing their character, even if it might not impact the gameplay. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the latter half of this presentation, so keep that in mind. And a good example of dialogue is Hades. They use dialogue in that game between all the hacking and slashing to really drive the story forward and reveal character backgrounds, subplots, and motives. And so even though it's not a super heavy like RPG type game or visual novel type game, and even though a lot of the gameplay does focus on actually fighting your way through the underworld, there is so much dialogue in that game. There are over 300,000 words, I believe, in that game, which is a lot. It is greater than the amount of words in the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, all in this one game, that doesn't even like have that much of the gameplay is hacking and slashing. That is incredibly impressive and really shows you how well put together that game is. And then also another sort of obvious one is cutscenes and cinematics. These are really great for big storytelling moments. Typically they play like a movie with little to no interaction for the time being. And they can be used to like very cleverly place them at key moments in the story to allow for transitions, emotional impact, or reveals. In other words, they can sort of break up the gameplay a lot, especially if you have a game that's several hours long, and sort of drive the narrative forward. So it's not just pieces loosely put together. And then also sometimes having that no choice, you have your choices lead to something big that you have no control over, can be used for some really great emotional impact, in my opinion. Another Dragon Age example, like I said, my favorite game series. But in Dragon Age 2, the cutscenes are used to differentiate between each act of the story, as well as other key moments. So that game is told in 3 separate acts, each which has like a 3-year time span in between them. And the way that story is told, the writing is really clever because the whole game is told by the character Varric telling the story to the character Cassandra, who's interrogating him about the events of the game. So the cutscenes act as like a storytelling element for how the game is being presented as a whole. And also, like I said, really cleverly placed to break up large moments of the story. Flavor text. This is a fun one. It's often used in card games. So if you play card games, you'll probably see it on all the little cards. And it's defined as text that does not affect the game's mechanics, but gives background information on characters, places, etc., to enhance the game's atmosphere. So what that means is it's really good for fleshing out world building and immersion, or just giving your players a fun little extra something to read. It's not necessarily impactful on how the player plays the game in a literal sense, but can be impactful on how they play the game in a sense of how they feel, how connected they feel to the story, how immersed they are in the world. Just because it gives you a little bit of extra extra lore. And that's really fun because it's kind of unlimited in what you can do with it, because you don't have to have it conform to your game's mechanics. You can just place it at clever little places, clever moments, that, just give your players a little extra something. And so this example is a Pokemon card. The flavor text on this card, if you can't read it because the text is really small, it says, "These Pokemon arose from the spirits of people interred in graves. Each retains memories of its former life." So, that's not relevant to the stats of the card or anything, but it tells you a little bit about these Pokemon, which is pretty cool. And then there are barks. You probably know what these are, but just didn't maybe not know what they're called. They're basically the lines or like chatter called out by NPCs. How they say hello when your character approaches, or things like that, what they say in battle. And they're really good for fleshing out character as well as atmosphere and immersion, again, because think about it, if you're going through a game, you're walking through this environment of a world, you, as a character, from the character's point of view, you probably wouldn't be hearing just utter silence until you choose to talk to somebody. So by having NPCs call out these lines at certain moments, helps you kind of feel immersion there. But your players will be hearing these a lot should you choose to include them. So just be careful about what you write. They get a really bad reputation sometimes for being annoying. And I would encourage you to read this article that I've linked here on writing barks. It's actually a really good article I really like, give you a little bit more information on what they are and how they work. I know, going back to the bad reputation for being annoying, one of the examples I've included is the classic "you never should have come here" from Skyrim that like everybody says in that game. That is what came up when I searched most annoying video game bark. People have strong feelings about that, and there's lots of memes. Plus anything else you might hear an enemy or ally call out in battle, that all falls under barks as well. All right, so here are some things to think about when writing for a game. Your story must serve the game. So you really have to work in conjunction with the other developers to make sure these pieces all fit together. And so this relates to the tip that I gave you on this slide. Take tutorials on coding, art, music, and sound effects, and the other areas that you can think of to have a better grasp on how your writing fits into the bigger picture. Because if you don't really understand what the people you're working with on your development team do, or how you support each other, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to write something that feels cohesive with the game, and that feels like it really serves what the game wants to be. And again, play your game. These story-driven games can be lots of fun, but depending on the type of game you choose to make, you might need to reel it back a little bit, especially if you are used to writing a novel or a screenplay, and maybe not a screenplay if you have had it like developed into a film. But if you come from like a novelist background and you kind of are mostly just working with yourself, you might find that you need to take it back a little bit so that you don't need to bog down your audience with all the information. And I say that from experience because I love to write and I love to include as much information as I can and really get into the world building, but it has to be a fun game. Your writing has to enhance the experience. And I'm not saying reading is not fun, but sometimes you have to make sure that the pacing of whatever you're presenting your player with is consistent with the pacing of the game, like the other elements of the game, if that makes sense. So that's just things to think about, and you get a better sense for that the more you play games and the more you play what you're writing. All right, so we're gonna go into Yarn Spinner for a little bit. This is a really great writing tool that it essentially allows for branching dialogue, and it can be really easily integrated with Unity. It goes right in there as a Unity package and comes with its own dialogue manager. And so it's very intuitive. You'll find if you've used Twine before that the syntax in the editor and the interface in the editor is very similar, but Yarn Spinner is a lot easier to incorporate with Unity. And so that's why we as a club at Studio are kind of leaning towards Yarn Spinner as the main program that we want to be using for writing in our games. So what is Yarn Spinner? It's a writing tool made specifically for game dialogue that can integrate into Unity. Like I said, it allows for branching dialogue, and that if you've used similar programs such as Twine, its usage will be very familiar. Really great example, Night in the Woods was written using Yarn Spinner. So if you look at their tutorials on the Yarn Spinner website, they will use Night in the Woods as examples, which is very helpful if you've played the game before. If you haven't, I recommend it. It's a really great game. And again, if you play it and then look at those tutorials, it'll be so clear how it integrates into the game and what the possibilities are for using it. So while we get started, I'll eventually move into Unity, but if you haven't yet and you want to follow along, please download Yarn Spinner as a .unity package file from the link above, and install it into Unity. If you don't know how to do that, and you're new with Unity, open a project in Unity, just double click, or not double click, sorry, right click anywhere in the assets folder and click import new package. And so you want to do a custom package there, and then you'll have to select the Yarn Spinner package file wherever you have that in your files, and you want to click import all files. I will show you what that means once I get to Unity in a second if you don't know. And then also you're going to want to download the Yarn editor. This does work in the browser, but you can also download it as an app. And if you don't want to tune in for the rest of this tutorial, here are some other resources. I recommend going to their website. They have a lot of great tutorials on there, but if you want to stick around and keep watching this to see me go through it, more hands-on, stick around. All right, now here we are. This is the Yarn editor, as you can see up here. I have it downloaded as an app onto my computer. You can use it in the browser if you want. The browser is perfectly fine as well. Also allows you to open multiple files at once, which is helpful. Unfortunately, the editor does not allow me to do that. So I will have to, once I switch, I'll have to click file and open a new file. Before we go into anything too deep, I want to make sure that you know that it needs to be saved as a yarn once you do anything to the file. This will allow Unity to recognize it when you actually put the file into Unity, import the file into Unity. This will let the dialogue manager actually read it. And we'll go into Unity in just a bit. I'm just first going to go over some of the usage of the program and some of the syntax, just so you kind of know what you can do with this. So the main thing that you can do is you're going to control the flow of your dialogue using a few different commands. And so the main one is branching. So as you can see here, I have just a bunch of text with 2 characters, or 3 characters actually. Each character has their name and then a colon and then what they say. Essentially, this means that it'll read this text as, a line of dialogue. It'll read this as another line of dialogue. And, you can indicate who is saying what. And so we're going to get to our first branch. I have a choice. You have been granted another chance. Would you like to take it? Yes or no? And so what I've done here is, this is the branching dialogue syntax. And so what I've done here is I've created 2 brackets, the dialogue that I want to say, and then this indicates the node. So we're going to put one of these, and then the name of the node that it goes to. And so this is the same. Those are my 2 options, and I'll show you what that means. So these arrows connect this start node, and I forgot to mention, these little squares are called nodes, and they basically just contain your text compartmentalized into, and they flow into each other. It's very similar to Twine if you've used it before. If you haven't, this is what it looks like. Yeah, so you can see that I had that yes go into the start over node. And you can see that that arrow goes right into our start over node. And then that basically means if you choose the yes example, which all that will display is the dialogue yes in the black text here, then it will read the rest of this node. Or if you click no, then it'll read this node. And so now you can see in the this is the end node, I have another option for branches that's created entirely within the node without going into a new one. And that's this syntax right here, which that is a dash and a greater than symbol, creating this little arrow. And so what I've done is I've created this syntax here, and then I type my dialogue afterwards. And I've done the same with this one. These are two individual choices. And so then after this line, I've indented it, pressed tab, and then I've given the dialogue that comes after, I'm sure, just let me die already. Meanwhile, there is, let's see, how should I explain this? So basically, this is another version of branching that happens within the node. So instead of having this be in brackets and having it go to another node, which then contains this, basically it will, it just reads it in its own node here. And this actually should have an indent here to indicate that this goes back to start over if this choice and this choice only is selected. I will also write this into a new node so you can see what I mean by that a little bit more clearly. So let's say I have a character named John that says, "Hi, how are you?" And me, I want the option to say, "I'm fine," or "I'm not doing well." Just some basic dialogue. And let's say John has different responses to each of these, but I don't really want to create a whole new node because I don't really need that. It'll get a little bit more cluttered if he only has one difference in a line of response to this. So we'll say, "Cool, nice to see you," or yeah. Actually, no. We'll say, I don't know. "That's good." I don't know. It's hard to write dialogue on the spot, you know. Let's see if you just, let's say his other response could be, "Oh, I'm sorry." And so again, "I'm fine" leads to John saying, "That's good." "I'm not doing well" leads to John saying, "Oh, I'm sorry." But then here, if you want to continue on with what John is saying, but it's going to be the same for either of these choices after these different responses, you would not indent it and it will continue reading the rest of the node. So he says, "Well, it was nice seeing you." So to make this more clear, I would say, John would say, "Hi, how are you?" I would choose, "I'm fine." He'd say, "That's good. Well, it was nice seeing you." Or I would say, "I'm not doing well," and he would say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it was nice seeing you." So you kind of see how that works. So that's just another example of how to do branching. And then you can also do a jump, which you've already seen. This is a jump. You notice how I don't have the dialogue and then the node. I just have the node. And so that is because I've just done the double brackets, the name of the node and double brackets. And what that'll do is that once it reads this line, it doesn't do anything but jump over to this node. And so let me show you how it is there. Let's say after, well, it was nice seeing you, I want to go back to like start. So I start typing, and you see in this pop-up menu, we already have start node link. And so that really shows you that text is, with that syntax, just a link to the start node. And so that should make a lot of sense. That's a very easy thing to do. And so now you can see that it has the command there in blue, and the arrow goes back to start. Now, another thing you can do is you can set variables in Twine and use them for conditional dialogue. So how that would look, oh, and by the way, we're not going to put anything underneath this because this, as soon as this is read, it stops reading this node, so nothing underneath would be read. So let's just delete everything above and start over. Let's just delete all of it and start over. So a conditional is basically an option that only appears if a certain condition or variable has been met. And so what you would do for that is you would treat it like an option, this type of option. So let's see, you would say, let's just start with John's, hi, how are you? And then the option would be like to John or something like that. But you want this option only to, actually no, I think this would actually be your dialogue, so I'm fine. But you want this option only to be available if the variable, let's just call it something random, like had a good day, is met. So you're gonna do the less than sign. You can see it already created the other end of that in pink. And so then you're gonna do an if statement, if, and then we're gonna set, we did not set this variable, but I can show you, you'll see how to do that a little bit later. But essentially what you would do is if had good day variable is 0, or whatever variable that is, or is 1, whatever variable that is. And then you would do indent, and then you would bracket the outcome, which could be, you know, going to a different node, or it could just be John saying, oh, nice. Whatever, or whatever he says, whatever that condition is. Another way that you can do this is with an if statement. If you code, you'll know, exactly what that is. So John, hi, how are you? And then you can do, you would do if not, or say this is actually really good if you want to only talk to John one time. If not visited, the name of this node is just node because I didn't rename it, so we would just call it node. They all have unique names, that's important. Forgot the parentheses. There we go. If not visited node, and then you would tab and then you'd have whatever goes there, your option or whatever, and then you would basically end your if right there. And so that's kind of the basics. I'll show you what this means in practice as we head over to Unity and play the sample game. So hopefully that was helpful or made sense to you. I promise it'll make more sense once we play this sample game. I just wanted you to see me kind of go through it from scratch a little bit before we did that. So again, if you have never imported a package into Unity, you're going to right click, import package, custom package, and that'll take you to your files. You navigate to find the yarn spinner.unity package, and then you're going to import all. So if you go into the yarn spinner folder, and then we're going to go into samples, space, and then we're going to open this space scene here, which is the scene I have open right here. So let's play it for a second, and we're going to see how the dialogue system works. Okay, so this one we're going to move using WASD, and I think it's space to interact. All right, see, so they have the UI incorporated here. So that's another thing to know. You still need somebody to implement the UI and how it's all going to look, and there are different ways that you can do that in Unity, and different choices of, you know, how you're going to show what you're going to show, such as like the player's name and the colon, or maybe it looks a little bit different. Just, you know, work with whoever's doing UI on that. So we're going to click continue the dialogue. And so we have this choice. We're going to choose anything exciting happen in your watch. And this is important. Ship wanted to see you. Go say hi to it. And so now I go say hi to the ship. And we're talking to the ship now. And so the player says, Sally said you wanted to see me. Keep that in mind. We'll look at how we saw that conditional. But basically what we just saw is we talked to Sally. She told us to see the ship. Now we got this dialogue that says, Sally said you wanted to see me. We'll see how that works later. She totally did. Uh-oh. And you can also see, sorry, I'm in the way. The face of the ship was changing if you didn't catch that. We'll also take a look at that in Yarn Spinner as well. Now we go back to Sally. Now we have this dialogue option. Sorry about the console now that we've talked to Ship about it. All right, and so that's the little sample game. And so what we're going to look behind the scenes in the two scripts that we're using. They use, actually, it's not in scripts, it's the two files, the two yarn files they're using. These are the two yarn files, Ship and Sally. We're going to open those in our editor. So I'm going to click File and Open. I'm going to find where it is. Sorry, I don't really remember where it is. Sorry, I had it up, but then I don't anymore. So just give me a minute. Yeah, edit this out while I find it because I lost it. I lost it. It's in oh shit, I know where it is. Okay, you can start recording. You can start, you can edit it here. Okay, I'm back. I found it. If you can't find the file in your files, just go into find the Unity project and navigate through those folders that are in the package within the files for your project in general, and you should be able to find it, because sometimes they don't want to open like directly from Unity, so you're gonna have to do this. So we're gonna open Sally. And so let's take a look at Sally's nodes. So we see this if statement again, if visited Sally is false. So if we have not run the dialogue of this node, then it will play this dialogue. If we have, we just get the basic dialogue because we're not going to repeat this entire conversation with her. And then we end the if statement. So the else is contained within the if statement. Again, this is a built-in command, the if visited parentheses quotation mark node, parentheses quotation mark is false or is true. That's a built-in command with Yarn Spinner. Very simple to use, very great for controlling dialogue and making sure that you don't just repeat the same things over and over again. Very, very useful. So I'll take note of that. And then again, we have another if not visited Sally watch. This is exactly the same thing, except for instead of just running dialogue, it runs this choice. So if you haven't visited, so it runs this dialogue first, as we saw in the game. And then it gives you another if statement once you have reached the end of whichever one of these paths it was. And you get this choice conditionally, you get this choice that takes you to the Sally watch node. Now this is what I was talking about with the conditionals. So if Sally warning and not visited Sally sorry, so that's two conditions within one if statement, then you get this choice. And Sally warning is a condition that was set in the ship yarn file, I believe. So we're actually going to open the ship file now, and we're going to find that condition. Because remember, the ship warned us about Sally. So when the ship says, if you ever go off watch without resetting the console again, she'll flay you alive. So that was the dialogue that warns us about Sally, and this is the condition that it sets. Set Sally warning to true. So now you've set this condition as something that you can use even within other yarn files in the project to control the flow of dialogue and control what options you have for dialogue. So that is very important to know. You can set these conditions in Yarn Spinner itself, which is very nice. This wait is also, they could explain this in their tutorial better, but basically that means if you notice in the sample game, after this dialogue, there was a pause that we didn't immediately get this next line of dialogue. It waited 1 second. I believe the one is in seconds. I could be wrong about that though. And so that's just a way that you can control pacing, which is very nice too. It's just, you know, a very easy thing that you can do that kind of does a lot. And then also another thing important in here, we are setting the sprites. Like I said, take note of how the ship's face was changing. This is how they did that within the node itself. Set sprite, that is a command. Ship face happy. That indicates the sprite, the happy ship face. And so that is something that you can do in this as well. And that's very helpful because that means that you can really control, like, it's essentially like basic animation, like not like animation, but you know, it control other things than just the dialogue in Yarn Spinner on a basic and simple level. And so that's really it. That really goes over the most basic commands. You can also create your own commands that do other things. It just takes a little bit of coding. So if you're not a coder like me, then that's something that you would talk to your other developers with about. But yeah, just make sure you save the file. It'll update it to Unity just like if you're writing code. make sure it's saved as a yarn in the first place if you're doing something from scratch. And then, go back to Unity. If you want to play through this again, let's actually do that, so that now that I've talked you through the different parts, we can kind of see again what I'm talking about there and how this incorporates into the game. So again, we get this dialogue because we haven't visited her before. We're going to choose this, and she's going to tell us to visit the ship. This was a condition that we set. I didn't take you to that node where it set this condition, but that also set a condition that allows you to get the dialogue when it says, Sally said, this dialogue here, Sally said you wanted to see me. That's because that condition was set when Sally told us to talk to the ship. Just like the one coming up that I did show you, which is this one. Sally warning, remember, we set the condition Sally warning here. So, and we waited, you could see that, you could see the wait then. And then, we go back to Sally. Since we had Sally warning, we get the option, sorry about the console. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. Thank you for coming. And again, if you have anything more that you want to learn about Yarn Spinner, I encourage you to watch the recording of the advanced tutorial from last week. And if you have any more questions about writing or narrative or how to tell story in other ways than just writing, please DM me on Discord, send me a ping in our Discord server, and I'll try to get you back to you at my earliest convenience. Thank you guys. Thanks for watching.